Good evening. Today is March the 4th, right at 7:35, and I'm calling to order this evening's meeting of the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission. We're going to be running an abridged meeting this evening, so we're going to change from our normal course of action. First thing we're going to do is read the legal notice, as long as we have it handy. And then we're going to actually receive something, which is just about ready. And then we're going to get into the big festivities of the evening. So, I'm sorry?
Are you going to seat anyone?
Oh yeah, I guess I should see it everyone, shouldn't I? So I'll introduce members of the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission. We have Tom Costa, I'm Rich Meyer, we have Walter Corbiere, Richard Wallace, George Underhill, Ray Bauer, Josh Hirschman, Phil Johnson, and staff we have Katie, who's back, thank goodness, and Michelle. So glad to have everyone here tonight. We need to seat members. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So someone's got to sit out.
Nope.
No?
7 of 7.
There's 8 of us here, though.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Sorry. You go ahead. You want to? Phil, would you mind sitting out tonight, please?
We'll sit out.
Thank you, sir. But please enjoy part of the conversation that we've done. All right, Mr. Secretary, you ready?
Legal notice, Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission. Notice is hereby given that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing on March 4th, 2015 at 7:30 p.m. at the Nathaniel B. Green Community Center, Whitfield, room 1st floor, 32 Church Street, Guilford, Connecticut, for the following purposes. Number 1, consider adopting the Town of Guilford Community Coastal Resilience Plan as an amendment to the Plan of Conservation and Development. Copies of this application are available for inspection in the Office of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Town Hall South, 50 Boston Street, Guilford, Connecticut. At this hearing, persons may attend and be heard, and written communications will be received. Dated at Guilford, Connecticut, this 11th day of February, 2015. Richard Meyer, Chairman.
Thank you, Walter. I'd like to get a motion to change the agenda so that we can receive the special permit first.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So we have a special permit, Walter and Jennifer Yoxall, 50 Cooks Lane, map 122, lot 1702, zone R8, special permit, music instruction classes. Article 10, receive and set public hearing date.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to approve the minutes as well, or no? We'll do that at the end. I'm sorry. Forget it.
Thank you. All right, so at this time, maybe we'll ask George to come up. George, I'd like to turn the meeting over to you, and you can be the master of festivities for the evening. Thank you.
My name is George Crowell. I'm town planner, and I'll get us started tonight with our discussion of the proposed coastal resilience plan. This is the second public hearing that we've held on this subject. The first was held on January 7th. The first thing we'd like to do, I'll give you a brief kind of outline of our agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about a document that we prepared that hopefully you all have. If not, you can obtain a copy of it. It lists the questions that we thought were raised, most importantly at the January 7th meeting. And then it shows the responses that our planning team have developed to those questions. I'd like to go over that very briefly, at least in part. Kevin is going to follow me. Kevin McGee, our environmental planner, is going to follow me with a brief presentation, including some photographs of coastal issues that we've experienced over the last few years, just to remind us of sort of why we're here. He'll be followed by Nathan Froling of the Nature Conservancy, part of our project team. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the science questions that have been raised. He'll be followed by Alexander Felsen from the Urban Ecology and Design Laboratory at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and Yale School of Architecture. He's going to talk a little bit about the role of the state and some of the state programs and some other initiatives that are ongoing. And then we'll follow that up with a discussion of how to implement this plan. That discussion will be led by myself along with Tim Turway, who's a planner and a researcher, also at the Yale Forestry School. We'll be talking about implementing the plan. Hopefully we can do all that fairly briefly so that we can get into some comments and questions from you all, which is really the main purpose of this meeting, to hear you. When we get to that point, we're going to limit, at least initially, comments to 3 minutes, either questions or comments pro or con, to not more than 3 minutes. Once we've heard from most of you who want to speak briefly, then anybody who wants to make a longer presentation will be able to do that toward the end of the public forum. And we'll try to make this as interactive as possible and as informal as possible. Obviously, the commission members, if you have questions, please feel free to jump in at any time. The January 7th meeting resulted in a number of concerns, questions that dealt with a variety of subjects. The first one I'll try to talk a little bit about is the question that reads, how does the plan account for impacts to property values and/or the town's tax base? I'm not going to read this entire text that you have in front of you, but the most important thing is that the town plan, the Coastal Resilience Plan, recognizes that a sizable portion of the town's tax base is connected to coastal real estate. And if for no other reason, that means that what we're talking about here tonight and in this plan is a very important subject as far as the town of Guilford is concerned. Roughly $15 million to $15 million a year in annual revenue comes from property taxes in the coastal area, which again is a substantial amount of the town's tax revenues in any given year, and therefore it's very important. The plan deals with and recommends actions and policies that are designed, we feel, to ameliorate or mitigate adverse impacts from sea level rise and other coastal hazards in order to protect that tax base, in order to protect those property values. The Coastal Resilience Plan seeks to create ways of maintaining and adding value to our coastal communities through investments in public infrastructure, most importantly, in order to preserve property values, in order to preserve neighborhoods, and we believe that this plan really does address that property value question. Similarly, questions were raised about whether or not the plan suppresses property values in the coastal area. And I think our answer to that question is basically the same. We believe by having a responsible plan that deals with all the potential options for action for the town, again, including infrastructure, including regulatory changes, including land acquisition, and many of the other things that are recommended in the plan, we believe that those actions will enhance property values, again, protect our neighborhoods, encourage ways for neighborhoods to maintain the value of their communities through proactive decision-making, proactive thinking. Questions were asked about how much communication has there been about the plan during the process of the plan creation, and what are the implications for property owners of this communication. And also questions were asked about how a homeowner obtains information and gets involved in this planning process. As we identify in this document again, there were at least 6 public meetings through the 3 or so year period of time during which we worked on this. There were 17 town administration meetings and 3 phases of the plan which were developed, which those documents are all available on the town's website. The first document deals with assessing vulnerabilities. The second deals with discussion of options for dealing with coastal resilience issues, and then the third is the plan itself, which is really the subject of our meeting tonight. Again, there's lots of information available in all those documents about this issue, and of course our town staff, myself and Kevin McGee in particular, are available to work with homeowners and property owners if they do have issues or if they have interest in this planning process. Government's role, local government's role in the development of the plan and the implementation of the plan will be discussed in a little bit more length later on when we talk about implementing this plan. But we believe that the role of local government is to help organize coastal communities, to advance their own agendas with regard to dealing with coastal issues. The role of government, of course, is to provide and protect public safety. The role of government is to deal with issues associated with infrastructure, to provide resources for infrastructure improvements, in our case, particularly road improvements, and then also later on in our process, protective structures or protective actions, which are, again, a proper role for local government. Government's role is also to regulate land use and land development, and that's also discussed and anticipated in a variety of ways in the plan itself. Some questions were asked about specific coastal neighborhoods, particularly if you're familiar with the plan. We described hypothetical or possible planning strategies for the Seaside Avenue neighborhood, which is one of the more vulnerable places in Guilford with regard to coastal flooding and coastal storm impacts, and also the Soundview Road neighborhood, which is an industrial commercial neighborhood in Guilford's case. We stressed that these plans were hypothetical. They weren't meant to be a prediction of any particular scenario, and they weren't meant to be a prescription or anything proposed specifically for those neighborhoods. They were meant to be illustrations of how neighborhoods can come together and develop plans for their own future. We're anticipating that we will redraft these two sections of the plan and place them in an appendix to the plan so that there's no ambiguity or misunderstanding about what the plan is saying with regard to these two neighborhoods. Again, these are not recommended scenarios for these neighborhoods. They are hypothetical planning studies that are meant to suggest how neighborhoods can come together and work together to develop plans for their own future. The final thing we'd like to talk about will be the questions of science and the questions of projections of sea level rise, which we'll come back to in a few minutes. At this point, I'd like to introduce Kevin McGee, our environmental planner, who's going to take us through kind of a reminder of why we're here. Kevin?
Okay, since we haven't had any major storms in the past couple of years, I'd like to remind the Commission and the public about what coastal resilience is all about. And as you can see from the photo here, it means blocked roads and flooded roads. Coastal flooding is the ability to resist, absorb, recover from, or adapt to coastal hazards such as sea level rise, increased flooding, as we see here on River Street, and more frequent and intense storm surges. Again, more access issues due to storms, and this is actually December of 2014 during a high tide nor'easter event, flooding out 146 near Station 10 Road. This other nor'easter type events in high lunar tides on Prospect Avenue here. This photo also demonstrates how flooding affects structures and access to neighborhoods. 146 is a great example of really why you should turn around and not drown, as the saying goes. This is a really fast-flowing stream area, or actually flooding area here, and numerous cars have actually been washed off and into the north side of the river here. This is actually a great demonstration area for temporary detours which could be established to prevent people from going through these areas. And that's one of the items discussed in the plan. Another one, 146, is also during the December 2014 flooding event. So it doesn't have to be these major hurricanes which we have issues from. It's these local storms we're dealing with coastal resilience from. And again, cars trying to make it through it. This is a great case study here, Old Quarry Road. This is photos taken a couple years ago of Old Quarry Road, all flooded over. And then this past summer, flip the slide, the Public Works Department went through and raised and elevated the road. This is a high tide event there again, and the public has access to their neighborhood. So this is what we're looking for in terms of coastal resilience. Storm surge is also another issue with coastal resilience. This is tropical storm on Falcon Road, like Bloody Cove and the tennis courts down there in Safety's Head. Storm surges also create massive damage to structures right along the shoreline. It demonstrates, you can see the houses right next door, which are up and elevated, not affected, and this other house either set lower or not built to quite the same standards, washed right off its foundation right a couple hundred feet from the Guilford line in that road. East Haven's been sort of the example of a tropical storm marine. It really shows the effects of storm surges, of how large houses get picked up by the waves and bashed into the neighboring houses there. Another example of East Haven there. Shell Beach Road, this is right after Storm Sandy. The main point with this one here is, yes, you have access issues, but you can see on the slide here, this debris line with all the marsh grass and stuff right across the road. That is how high the water came up during Storm Sandy. And we're looking at using, basically, if we can get our neighborhoods protected to the elevation of these storm surges, they could potentially be protected for whatever the elevation the sea level rise wants to be in the future. Seaside Avenue, also right after Storm Sandy. I'm not sure if you can see on the fence there, the seaweed and the grass line right on the fence there. This was surveyed by USGS and was found to be 3 feet above grade there with how high this water got there, which correlates in their survey to 8.4 feet above an AVD. So that's why when you see you're planning things for first floor elevations, this is why these properties have to be elevated, so these people can live in their houses without getting damaged. How do we solve some of these problems? Noted in the plan is elevate your house. There's a house on Middle Beach Road in Madison that went up after either Sandy or Irene. Placed it right above the sea level. If anybody wants to take a ride down, and I just found out today on the phone, I have a photo of it, go down Seaside Avenue. There's a house right now currently being elevated up to the FEMA standards. Back again to Whitfield Street, December 14th, our heavy nor'easter pushing the water right into the marshes, right up against the houses here. And if you see in the next photo how this house made itself resilient is elevate the utilities. A simple thing that we discussed in the plan is get your utilities above the flood level. You have less repair damage after the storm. So you have them up there, you can move back in your house right after the storm. So this is the AC unit up. This last slide here also deals with elevation of your utilities. The property on the left shows how all these things are within the flood area. The AC unit, your furnace, your computers, your storage of records in your basement there. And just simple things that residents can do, which we talked about in the plan, is move the utilities, your AC unit above the flood elevation, your furnace in your basement above the flood elevation if you need to, find another location on the first floor if you can't get out of your basement, if your basement's within the flood area, and move your utilities above the flooding elevations. So yes, if it does flood, you open up the door, you get your pump, you pump out your basement, but you don't have to rewire your house due to damage. So this is what we're looking for in terms of coastal resilience. There's several things that you can do to protect your houses, and that's what we want the public to know as part of this plan. And to go further on our coastal resilience is Nathan, who's been discussing several more aspects we have.
Hello? Okay. I'm going to talk just very short about the science. I'm not going to go into much detail, except on one question that you see up here. There is more information in the packet that I think Kevin sent around on the science side of this plan question. But this is a question that we have seen a number of times, and we want to address it, and that is, how can the data that we have now in terms of the sea level rise that we're already seeing, real data, the real world out there, how does that relate to these projections that we're using in this plan, and why are the projections so much higher than if we just use the existing data from the past? So that's what I want to address. Why is there such a difference there? Is that clear, the question? Okay. So this next slide, I'm going to refer to this document, which I think is a really important one for you all to know about and to review if you're interested. This is the global sea level rise scenarios that were prepared for the United States National Climate Assessment. This, I would say, is the most official document we have in the United States. It was put together by many of the federal agencies and scientists and universities working on this topic. And you see NOAA, U.S. Geological Survey, Department of Energy is under the SCRDP, Department of Defense, EPA, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So you have a lot of brains and thinking on this topic. And what this assessment is a synthesis of all the scientific literature that's out there on the question of sea level rise projections. The other thing you see, all the fine print on the right, is the fact that this document is actually called out as the official reference or resource to be used by the state of Connecticut, and for all the planning efforts that are going on in town levels as well. Public Act 13179 that specifically calls out for this report to be used. So I just wanted to make some reference to the credibility of this assessment. So next slide. So this is the last slide. This is what I want to show you, is if you look at the historical rate of sea level rise, we're looking at it right here. 1900 is here, 1950, 2000. By the way, this graph is in what you're getting that Kevin is handing out right now. This is the executive summary of the National Climate Assessment. So the point is that all the projections that have been considered are generally exponential. It's true that it's theoretically possible that we'll continue to see a very slow rate of increase. That would be, this purple line on the bottom reflects the assumption of looking at the historic trends and assuming they're going to stay the same, they're not going to start increasing. It is widely accepted that the projections are going to begin to be exponential. How exponential is the question. So that's the first answer to the question, is that it's not, the future is not going to look like the past. What we don't know is exactly what that is going to look like. But it's very highly unlikely that it's going to be this. It's theoretically possible, and this summary or this assessment does include this as one of the considerations if it just continues to rise at the same rate as it's been doing historically. So that's point number one. Point number two is the sea level rise projections that are used in the Guilford Coastal Resilience Plan we're talking about tonight fit within here. We're not out over here. We're not below this either. That would be silly. We're inside of this. What the projections that the Guilford Coastal Resilience Plan uses is these mean global sea level rise projections, and then with an attempt to localize them to account for factors that look at Long Island Sound more closely. And so again, they are within these projections. Point being that we're not using numbers that are outside of or more exaggerated than what has been accepted nationally and also what's been made official by the state of Connecticut. The final point I will make is that the Guilford Coastal Resilience Plan doesn't pick any one of these. It doesn't say this is the right number or the right projection or that this is. It is simply trying to show that the best science is giving us some sense of what the possibilities are. We talk about high, medium, and low, and that is similar to this. These differences come about by how you try to estimate how much ice melt we're going to have from Greenland and Antarctica, and how much the ocean is going to expand from thermal expansion. So again, I don't think anyone has a silver bullet or can see into the future. But as I said, the plan doesn't pick any of those. It simply tries to portray the range that's out there. So that's it. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. I think the next person is Alex Felsen.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. Thanks, everybody. Okay, well, I'll keep this brief as well. So my name is Alex Felsen. I'm actually a landscape architect and ecologist, and I'm an assistant professor at Yale University. I teach between the School of Architecture and Forestry, and I run the Urban Ecology and Design Lab. So I'm particularly interested in thinking about land use change and working within communities to envision strategies for working with nature, building on natural systems, integrating green infrastructure. And I have a history of experience with that kind of work as project director for the Million Trees Project in New York, where I worked on urban forestry, and more recently building green infrastructure in Seaside Village in Bridgeport, for example. So I'm interested in actually embedding experiments into design projects as a way of incorporating research as a component of land management. And so I just wanted to share with you, Guilford is one of the projects that I've had the opportunity to work on with TNC, Malone McBroom, George, and others, and it's been a very interesting process to think of at the local scale and work on a bottom-up approach to envision how a municipality like Guilford can address these large-scale challenges, but also to build on the value and culture of the municipality. So more recently, I've been working with the state on coastal adaptation, and we're working on this a HUD grant that is a fairly large CDBG recovery fund that amounts to about $720 million total available dollars. Next slide. And so we've been working at the state level, working with DOT, Department of Housing, DEEP, around thinking about coastal adaptation, not only looking at multiple municipalities across the coast and thinking about the challenges they face and how you can think about adaptation strategies. And the work that I've done in Guilford was really helpful to think about this broader effort, and the opportunity to interface with state agencies is giving me their perspective as well, and thinking about where the funding opportunities can be, where we can establish funding opportunities, which is one of the big goals, I think, and values of Guilford, being essentially ahead of the game with the hazard mitigation plan and earlier in 2011 and the coastal adaptation plan that we're proposing. I met with Stratford and other municipalities, and they're talking about the Guilford Coastal Resilience Plan and their interest in developing something similar. Milford as well. So there's these, and then the SCROG, the Regional Council of Governments, is working on a regional scale coastal adaptation plan for multiple municipalities. So they're all seeing this as an opportunity for organizing their approach to establish a relationship for funding that can come down and develop and feed into adaptation solutions. And a lot of it has to do with getting some alignment and coordination at the ground level, and showing the intention and value and the way in which you can establish this kind of communication across stakeholders, because these are complex problems that we all face. Next slide. So we've gone through a systematic mapping of homes, transportation networks, economic drivers, critical infrastructure. Go ahead. And then, there's a fairly large amount, actually Connecticut passed for, in terms of qualifying for disaster funding, with a fairly large amount of infrastructure and housing costs. Next slide. And so what we've been thinking about is economic revitalization, thinking about transit-oriented development as a component of one way of getting funding for local municipalities, and try to link that TOD strategy to a resilience corridor approach that gives you access and egress from coastal shorefront communities. So you're trying to maintain and establish resiliency at the town level to ensure existing homeowners stay and that future home buyers are interested. Next slide. And so we've identified typologies along the Connecticut coast where essentially there are pockets where you have ridge lines and housing and other housing in floodplain zones, and thinking about identifying egress opportunities in sort of the easiest way to create resiliency in these in these typological conditions. Next slide. And so you can see in a zone, it's 3 zones: a transportation zone, the resilience zone, and a coastal zone. And thinking about how can we invest in that resilience zone strategically to maintain shorefront communities and to ensure that there's some more safety and lower risk and more of the infrastructure needs like water main and other values to the shorefront communities. So next slide. And that's the part of it is also fitted with a finance resilience strategy. And so finance resilience is a key part of this kind of grant. Next slide. Public consultation has been an important part of our process, which I think part of the argument around the Guilford plan is really a public process where there's a lot of communication and feedback. So the letters that we've been getting and information feedback to this process is really valuable for giving us ideas about how to build on what we're trying to achieve and getting local knowledge about what's of greatest concern. Next slide. And so then there's an effort to integrate that into long-term commitments around shore community, CIRCA, and public laws. And I want to introduce Jim O'Donnell, who's the director of the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, who we've been partnering. I've had the opportunity to partner with on this grant, but he's also really interested in the process taking place in Guilford. He's in the audience here. Jim, do you want to just say hello? And we've been talking a lot about what the state of the science is currently and what we know and how local it is, and and how to scale down global models to municipal scale decision making. So the opportunity here is really to have an organization like CIRCA involved in informing and giving feedback to questions that people within the PMT and within the town are raising, so that we can get this kind of iterative process going and answer some questions and try to move forward with the goals that the goal of adaptation. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. I think I forgot to introduce Chuck Andrews, who's here tonight. He's our legal counsel to the Planning and Zoning Commission. He was at our first hearing. If you recall, he discussed a little bit about the nature of the plan of conservation development, what its significance is, what its legal purpose is. And he also talked a little bit about the issue of eminent domain and some of our concerns about that. And he's here tonight if either commission members or members of the public have questions on any of those topics. He's here to help us address those. We'd like to conclude our initial presentation here very briefly. Tim and I are going to kind of coordinate a brief discussion of how we go about implementing this plan. That question's been raised by members of the commission and by others. I call your attention to the other plans that we've done and the vehicles that have been used to implement them. Typically, implementation strategies take the form of a list of actions or action items which will be accomplished hopefully by various town agencies, Planning and Zoning Commission, Board of Selectmen, and others. That's usually the way the implementation section of the plans have been written. This plan requiring coordination of many decision makers, we're trying to take a little bit different approach in how we recommend implementing this plan, keeping in mind that the implementation starts with the Planning and Zoning Commission, hopefully approving the plan or some variation on it, and also then the Board of Selectmen approving it, and then moving to action and decision making by various town agencies, the Board of Selectmen and the Planning and Zoning Commission probably being the most important. So we're going to talk a little bit about overall coordination, implementation institutions, and implementation strategies. And Tim's going to interrupt me if he has anything to add to this discussion. Sure. Most importantly, the plan has talked about either creating a new coastal commission to be responsible for implementing this work, or using an existing commission, the Hazard Mitigation Commission, which has already been created by the Board of Selectmen in the town. It has responsibilities that overlap with and dovetail nicely with most of the responsibilities and ideas that are developed in this plan. So in either case, the Board of Selectmen would be required to take action to either create a new coastal commission of some kind or to modify the ordinance that creates the Hazard Mitigation Commission. would give them the responsibility for implementing this plan. Go ahead. The plan would involve, like our other plans, really a variety of town agencies and commissions that already exist. The Public Works Department, the Public Works Commission would have primary responsibility for carrying out projects that relate to town infrastructure. The Planning and Zoning Commission would, of course, deal with issues that are regulatory in nature primarily. The Health Department would deal with issues associated with sewage disposal systems. You'll recall that's an issue in many of our coastal communities, and the potential for flooding sewage disposal systems is something that the plan addresses. The Health Department will be active in that area. The Land Acquisition Commission, several of you I know are acquainted with that and serve on the Land Acquisition Commission. They would deal with any issues associated with open space or other property acquisition that might be recommended or called forth in the plan. The Conservation Commission would provide advice and consultation on conservation issues. Engineering Department would be involved. And I'm sure there are other town agencies that we haven't listed here that would be responsible for individual actions associated with implementing the plan. Most importantly, the Hazard Mitigation Commission, its duties would be, or the New Coastal Commission's duties would be to kind of coordinate all of the other actors that would be associated with implementing the plan and establishing priorities. Also, the Hazard Mitigation Commission or the Coastal Commission would be overseeing any changes or improvements or additions or modifications to the plan as it evolves in the future. And we know that, like our other planning projects, we're constantly doing new plans, looking at new issues, either geographic areas or substantive. The implementation strategies would be the traditional ones, which we're all familiar with. We're usually a public agency like the Planning and Zoning Commission thinks that they want to propose something, they do. There's a public hearing, a public meeting, comments are made, and then actions are taken. This plan envisions more outreach, a more robust outreach strategy, if you will, especially with the neighborhood planning process, which we've talked about so much and which was illustrated by the Seaside Avenue and also the Soundview Road discussions in the plan. We really think that this is an important part of coastal resilience planning, neighborhood-based plans, because each neighborhood's different. The physical structures and physical characteristics are different in Sachem's Head than they are in Seaview or Seaside or our other neighborhoods. We really think it's very important that it be a neighborhood-based process.
George, can we chime in with something?
Yes, please.
Real quick, first thing, my apologies for sitting down and being behind this. I'm kind of tethered to the machine. Just to clarify this point here, the bottom part of the implementation strategies of how this might go about has relation to the institutions such as Public Works, Health Department, Engineering Department listed above, and others. And it's pointed out in the plan that the problems that were identified in the Coastal Adaptation Risk and Vulnerability Report, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending how you look at it, cross-cut the responsibilities of all of these existing commissions. So what we're suggesting here is that there's actually an opportunity here for multiple commissions to perhaps work together on these issues as they are supersede, cross-cut through all the responsibilities of the different institutions. So the implementation strategies on the bottom should ideally begin to reflect that, not just citizens beginning to partake in the planning process beyond just the traditional public hearing and comment as we're in here now, but also the institutions as well.
We have specific types of actions or targets that are described in the plan that relate to several categories of action we've talked about quite a bit. Funding for public works is one strategy or target. Enabling protection and conservation is another. Establishing technical assistance is the third. And as we've just talked about, enabling neighborhood planning. These are four major subject areas for further implementation of the plan. Funding for public works, we really know quite a bit about that already. We've been working on public works projects. That would include protected structures. It would include shoreline protection, land management, roads and roadway alterations, water supply, sewage disposal systems. We would, under enabling protection and conservation, we'd be looking at strategies related to acquisition of land, especially for marsh protection and marsh advancement, which we know is a really big issue. We'd also be looking at potentially modifying zoning regulations and other types of land use or building codes that might better protect our citizens and their property, and also regulate new developments so it's consistent with the goals and objectives of the plan. That would be mostly under the Planning and Zoning Commission and or the state through its building code process. Technical assistance is an area that we haven't really talked too much about, although except by perhaps allusion, but we already provide a lot of technical assistance through our offices at Town Hall South. Citizens are frequently asking questions relating to coastal management issues, especially having to do with flooding, flood insurance, FEMA rules, utility issues, insurance questions. We want to make that process as friendly as possible and provide as much support for our citizens as we can through a technical assistance process of educated and competent advice to people. And again, we want to enable this neighborhood planning process. And in the process suggested by the plan, again, this is how we might go about doing these things. Each of these actions has a little bit different responsibility, depending on who the actors are. And again, the overseeing agency would be the Hazard Mitigation Commission or a new coastal commission. We have some specific actions that maybe are not in the plan right now, but would be in the future. We've talked a lot about, and several of you have suggested we create a system for measuring and monitoring environmental conditions over time. Nathan talked about that a little bit before. You're going to hear a little bit later this evening from one of our citizens about some changes that he thinks might be warranted in the plan itself relating to both the content and to the implementation. I think that's an example of how we would view this document and this planning process as a continuous one. Finally, I want to conclude. I think where we are, you know how to reach us. If you do have questions or comments in the future about either this project or anything related thereto, we can provide assistance to you, we can share resources with you, and I believe that concludes our kind of presentation, informal though it might be, and we really want to engage you now and try to answer questions you might have or hear from people. If you just want to make a brief statement, I'll be happy to bring this microphone to you. You don't need to come up to the podium. If you want to make a fuller comment, we'd ask you to come up, but hopefully we can get through some short comments and questions right now, and then listen to some of this other more complicated material later this evening. So anyone want to say anything to us or ask any questions? Any commission members have any questions that you want to ask? You haven't already, so go ahead.
In the paper we got here is what's called the Substitute Senate Bill number 1012, Public Act 13-79, and I haven't seen this before, and I'm just wondering why it's here, what it's getting at, because it's a little complicated.
I think Kevin can probably address that better than anybody.
I can try to address it. I know Chuck's here, and I think he's familiar with these regulations. But Public Act number 13179, it defines sea level rise. It also defines the document that the planning agencies need to follow, which is a document we handed out to you, which is the NOAA document, which you have the executive summary for. There's a lot of codes here, but the important thing to know is on the second page here, we have subsection 4, or section 4, subsection D, section 823 of the general statutes. And Chuck can correct me here, but I believe that's dealing with the development of plan of conservation and development?
Correct.
Okay. And in your planning for plan of conservation and development, which we are asking this document to be part of, see the bottom line of section D there, is that as part of your plan of conservation and development, we need to recognize sea level changes scenarios published by the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration in the technical report OAR CPO-1. And that's the report we handed out, I just handed out to you guys. So it's kind of connecting the dots to why we have to look at sea level rise now. It's part of our state statutes for planning documents. And two, it provides us with the information of what documents we need to follow in terms of sea level rise numbers and how to plan for the future.
So George, I got a question for you myself.
Sure.
So are there any new state laws or statutes that don't use the word eminent domain, but enable the state or the municipalities to acquire properties from private property owners that perhaps local commissions don't want to issue permits for?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Your question is, are there new laws that will enable local governments to do things in the way of property acquisition that they can't do today?
Well, that were enacted in 2014.
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if Chuck does. Do you understand the question? Is there anything new adopted in 2014 related to this subject of property acquisition?
I'm not aware of any new eminent domain laws.
Okay.
No, but is there a workaround? Are you saying, is there something other than what's being called eminent domain? Is there a workaround to try to get to the same end?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
You don't know any, Chuck?
I'm not aware of any eminent domain laws. Maybe there is a law that is where I don't know. I'm happy to take a look at it.
Right. Well, one of the concerns is that this document it covers a million different things, but one of the concerns that one of the commissioners and I share is some sort of increased or recently increased opportunities for private citizens to lease their property. But as far as staff and council know, there is nothing new on the books that the state of Connecticut or any local municipalities have.
I'm not aware of anything. I think
I'll be covering that in my presentation.
Oh, you have something?
Oh, I certainly do.
Would you mind giving us a little bit now?
I can.
Can we, I know you have a comprehensive discussion you want to get involved in, right, Kurt?
Yeah, but I can
Just this one thing right now.
piece of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, bring this.
Fine. That's all right.
Go ahead. You want this?
Yeah.
I mean the minute. Come on up.
Okay, my name is Kurt Griffin, 638 Westlake Avenue.
Well, sir, could you come on up to the, well, if some people don't want to, it's okay if they...
You're fine.
Okay.
No, I don't think you need that one.
I don't need this.
Okay, everybody hear me? Okay. I wrote this. Does Guilford's coastal resilience plan increase the probability of losing your property to eminent domain? Not really. And the council at the January 7th meeting was correct in that. However, the 2012 bill, whose original stated purpose was to encourage a fair and orderly legal process to foster... Oh, okay. I'll hold it. Okay, thank you. To foster strategic retreat of property ownership over a period of several decades, and of course they're referring to the shoreline, that statement, that section was replaced by a strategic realignment of development in the final bill. It did not change the bill in any way. And this was for coastal lands that have a likelihood of being lost due to erosion and coastal lands that contain structures that are subject to repetitive damage. The key is likelihood based on exaggerated predictions of sea level rise in this plan. The bill says approval of any application to build or restore damaged property within coastal boundary may consider an impact that a rise in sea level will have on the proposed structure over the structure's life span. Excuse me. If any portion of such building would be located waterward of the mean high water. This is based on what I call outrageous sea level rise predictions in this plan that few consider viable. This is enough to bring this paragraph into force against you. All you need to know is the original stated purpose of the bill, to foster strategic retreat of property ownership over a period of several decades. A denied application, and this is within the 5128 was the, for a reference for our town council, was the raised bill. A denied application shall constitute of a taking of the property for which the owner shall be compensated. This is a new, separate from eminent domain, means to take property from landowners. Now, interestingly enough, Senator Len Fasano wrote testimony to the coastal resilience, or not resistance, the Shoreline Preservation Task Force, complaining about the wording of this bill, saying that we already have eminent domain, adding another layer of means to deprive people of their property, he objected to quite strenuously, and that information is in the state website. So I think that's the main reason why I object to the high levels of predicted sea level rise. Thank you.
Higher level of sea rise, we're including more properties that might be affected by this, because over the term of the lifespan of the structure, by our saying that these levels are going to be higher, we're including more properties. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
All right, so
The higher the predictions of sea level rise. Now, I listened to you at the February 18th meeting. I just caught the tail end of it. You said as long as you're around, you're never going to do anything like that. Well, that's fine, but you're not going to be around forever. And this plan will be.
Yep. All right, so good. So that's a good insight. So one of the concerns that you have is that if we endorse some possible, and right now they're promoting it as a possible sea level rise, but if we endorse this, we're sort of endorsing their basic projections. And by doing that, we're going to include more structures than are currently.
More structures and more land.
Okay, good. Well, thank you.
Yeah. One thing statement that I would make, although I think the sea level projections are extremely outrageous, I don't have the same complaint about the storm surges. I think those are quite reasonable.
Yep.
As
Good.
we've seen.
Thank you very much for your input. George, you have thoughts on that?
I don't really quite understand what the implication of the law is. I think as the statutes that Kevin talked about and also Nathan talked about, the state has already established the range of sea level rise projections that are required to be considered in local government planning. I think that's the gist of that law. So whether we endorse those or not, I'm not sure how that affects the operability of the state law. I'm also not sure in the statute that was being referred to that talked about permits. I'm not sure what kind of permits we're really talking about here.
It almost sounded as if you were talking about permits, state-issued permits that related to structures that were below the mean high water. But again, I'm not sure. This sounds like something we need to, research a little bit with our council. I think the fear that somehow the town is going to become an aggressive acquirer of property against the will of property owners is pretty unfounded. I think there's no evidence for that. Our plan quite clearly says that, eminent domain is not a tool that we would recommend under any circumstances. It is a power that the state has granted to local governments, and it exists. But we're certainly not recommending it as part of any of our planning documents.
George, I had a question, I guess, right? And maybe it's just my confusion. I think that what Kurt was saying, and I might be completely wrong, is that so there's language now that can be used by the Planning and Zoning Commission. If we deny an application. That would be a multi-page. Okay, but I think that before it gets to that level, we would have to change our own regulations because we're separate from the state government, right? Our planning and zoning regulations are our planning and zoning regulations. So we don't currently have something in our planning and zoning regulations which says we're going to do a taking if we deny your application. So I don't think that that would happen without our own adoption of those regulations.
That's certainly the way it's always worked up to this point, unless there's some kind of extraordinary new power that's been granted by the state via this law, which seems highly unlikely to me. If we're to regulate development, we regulate it through the adoption of the zoning code. We do have the powers of coastal site plan review, which are granted to us by the state. And what we can and can't do within those powers is strictly limited. So I believe you're correct. We would have to adopt new regulations, which would lead to, which would then give us the power
To act on what the state had said, yeah.
The state's suggestion or their consideration.
Hey, George, can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
From a planning perspective, when you're thinking about coastal adaptation, the storm surge events are the near-term consideration or concern. So I think, Kurt, the point that you're making about, that you're differentiating between storm surge as a potential risk and sea level rise, I think is a really important one. Sea level rise is a long-term issue. It's a press event that takes time. Storm surge is a pulse event that creates disturbances that we are anticipating to continue, and it's wave and wind and other kinds of resiliency concerns. So I think it's important to recognize they're both valuable.
Well, if I could just chime in, the concern and worry that some of the citizens have, the concern and worry that some of the citizens have about some sort of increase of opportunity for the state to reach in and take their family home property, it is really a serious concern, and I don't want to make a mistake and pass this or say, yes, we want to do this. While everyone's talking, we saw that the state is now mandating what we're going to use as a projection of sea level rise. And so does that affect any of our decisions? Are we now supposed to abide by this new thing when we just make decisions on properties that are located in a low-lying area? Has that changed now?
Well, I think the significance of the state's report that was alluded to and which is incorporated in the state regulation is that it gives us the authority to consider those projections when we develop new regulations, if we develop new regulations. As Josh said, we have to develop the regulations which go through the process, the normal process of any zoning code amendment. What the state law does is give us the authority to use those projections, which are based on the consensus science that
that we can incorporate those projections in our permitting and our site plan review process. I think that's the gist of that. Prior to the creation of that law, there would be no state guidelines as to how to do that.
Right. It's, the key word is consider.
Consider, right.
It doesn't dictate that you have to go one way or the other, but that this technical report is something that must be considered along with 10 other factors in Section D.
I don't have any, I mean, personally, I don't believe that the state has any designs on, acquisition of property. And I don't believe that they're creating any additional powers for local government to acquire property above and beyond what we already have. And I do know from my own experience, my long experience of doing planning, that if you have local governments that have their own plans that are carefully developed based on the best possible expertise, based on public input and property owner input, if you have a plan, you're much more likely to be able to determine your own destiny. If there is a conflict, you're much more likely, as we've talked many times, to be successful in doing infrastructure improvements that we think are important. It's not to say that the state isn't a powerful entity, but I certainly don't see any intention on the part of the state to do anything with respect to coastal property in Guilford that we don't want to do ourselves through this coastal resilience planning process.
We're still on commission questions? Mr. Chairman, I think this might be the appropriate time for me to read a short letter into the record that I sent to this commission and yourself earlier today. Dear Chairman Meyer and Planning and Zoning Commission, tonight we will attend an additional hearing on the town's coastal resilience plan. If we approve this plan, we should include language, quote, "This plan shall not be construed to support the use of an eminent domain as a tool for coastal resilience in Guilford," end quote. Most residents of Guilford already understand that this plan will not somehow cause takings of property, and that this plan will most of all provide opportunities for funding to protect life and property in town from weather events and rising water levels. I am confident that this additional statement will do nothing to undermine or affect the plan. Respectfully, Walter Corbier, PZC Commissioner. I have not heard of an example of this 2012 law that's been referenced of being used to take anybody's property. It's been, I assume it took effect in 2012 as well, but I think we'll probably hear more about that in a longer presentation from the same member of the public after commission questions and after other shorter statements from the public.
Thank you.
Sid, I know you have some robust presentation. You want to do that now, or you have a short comment?
Comment specific to this.
Okay.
I also have a number of questions for the interest.
Okay.
And I would keep my comments to the end, okay? Speak briefly.
Sure.
The immediate issues. I attended a number of the hearings on the state capitol on Senate Bill 5128 in 2012, and then also in 2013 when the cited legislation was ultimately passed. I don't believe 5128 survived in 2012, and it was the 13179 that really started moving things along. But a little bit of history is in order. The concern with what 5128 presumed to do was a recognition that the Long Island Sound is a shared property, a shared public property. And if it is left to the towns to piecemeal make strategy, it's likely to do damage and be counterproductive
in the greater sense of Long Island Sound. So there was an effort to say, is there something the state should be doing as guidance and as minimum standards that will help to guide what towns may do individually? Does the state have a proper role? That, as I recall, was the spirit and intent of 5128. At that time, the issue of, and I might add that these bills were brought forward under the chairmanship of Senator Ed Meyer, who was the chairman of the Environmental Committee. And I know that Senator Meyer struggled to find proper balance, and one of the things that concerned him most was the issue of strategic retreat with the implications of eminent domain. And he, on the one hand, recognized the need for the possibility, but on the other hand, recognized the strong public opposition that was likely to be among many of his and other legislators' constituents. So it was not an issue that was taken mildly by any means. And if I recall correctly, it was defeated in that 2012 session. Now, the interesting thing in that session, anecdotally, is that in the course of public testimony, then Commissioner of DEEP, Dan Estey, was pointedly asked, do you support strategic retreat as a strategy? This was after Irene, I believe. And he explicitly said, no, I do not. A year later, he came back, and Ed Meyer put the same question to him after Sandy. And he said it may be necessary in certain circumstances. Sandy was his come-to-reality moment that if sea level rise does what Sandy, in long term, what Sandy did in a moment, then strategic retreat will be necessary in certain circumstances, and there will be need to be policies to address that. Now, going to the slide that was up here a little while ago of the fence on Seaside Avenue with the scum line from Sandy, that's roughly the level of sea level rise under the high intermediate projection. That's what Seaside Avenue would look like, I believe, with a 3 to 4 foot sea level rise by the year 2080 to 2100. So why should you care about that in terms of setting a procedure or a policy level, a strategy level that you're going to be working toward as a commission over this period of time? I know some of you are in business, and some of you have some concerns about strategic planning. And in any form of strategic planning, you've got a variety of options, a variety of contingencies that you have to consider. But you don't manage to all of them. You bear them all in mind, but ultimately you have to choose one that you think is your most probable, and you have to work toward that one while you keep your other contingencies in your peripheral vision to see how things evolve. So what's important about those 4 probabilities that were shown on that graph in terms of the strategy you might take? Well, you need a timeline, you need a planning horizon of 50 to 100 years, because most of your infrastructure, private or public, has the potential of lasting 50 to 100 years, and more of it closer to 75 to 100 years. So anywhere you pour cement today, you have to ask yourself, is that going to be viable over its useful life, or is that useful life going to be curtailed, in this case, in some of our streets, by the risk of sea level rise? And in Seaside Avenue, I would say that's a salient question. So if you think that the buildings that we put there, the roads that we put there, the public parks are going to last for 75 to 100 years, may not be a problem. But if you expect them to, putting them there is going to truncate your public or private investment. And most people wouldn't want to do that if they knew those consequences in advance. So, of the 4 options given to you, which one would you choose and why? Well, I think there's some misinformation here. Yes, the state of Connecticut has not come down with a dictate that says you must choose one of these 4. But I believe NOAA has come closer to that, and I believe NOAA is hanging its hat on the probability that by 80 to 2100, we're going to see 3 feet of sea level rise worldwide. And I believe in their 2012 document, they stated, and on the East Coast, we may have an additional foot of sea level rise. Now, there are experts here who know more about this than I do, so I would bend to their authority if they choose to disagree with that recollection. But what they're choosing is the high intermediate of those 4. Not only did they choose that, but the city of New York has essentially chosen that in its long-range planning. Not only has the city of New York chosen that, but the U.S. Navy has chosen that they're expecting 3 feet of sea level rise worldwide by 2080 to 2100. And what does the U.S. Navy care about that? Well, they've got about $100 billion of shorefront property around the world, so they're a little bit concerned about the longevity of their capital investment, which is, by the way, our capital investment. So those are the considerations that you need to have. Although the state of Connecticut today has not said high intermediate is the one. Basically, if I recall correctly, and please jump up and tell me if I'm wrong, NOAA's pinning its bets on that one among the 4. And I think that that's conservative, and you need to understand why they're choosing that one. The high intermediate reflects the assumption that we're not going to bend the curve on carbon emissions significantly in the near term. And for this discussion, I call the near term the next 20 years. Which means if that's the case, we're going to continue to see progressively greater global warming, which is going to lead to progressively greater sea level expansion from thermal expansion. The other element of intermediate high is the assumption that there will be significant ice loss from Greenland and Antarctica, but not the highest level of projection. That's for the 4th one, the high projection. So they're saying we're going to have a lot of sea ice loss, and that will add to the thermal expansion of the oceans. I know of nothing to question the probability that those assumptions are correct. We as a globe have not done anything, and I'm not getting into the politics here, but simply to state the fact. We as a globe have done nothing significant to curtail carbon emissions, which means those 2 assumptions of the intermediate high are reasonable and conservative. And by conservative, I use that in the accounting sense of what conservative means. Conservative means you anticipate all costs and you don't count your revenues until earned. And the costs that we're talking about here are the probabilities of the higher level of environmental impact. Those are the things you need to plan for. If it gets better than that, you can always step back from your severe discipline. But if it gets worse than that, you don't want to be at the optimistic side of that spectrum. So thank you very much.
We're going to come back to a number of other suggestions that Sid has, but I do want to give everybody here a chance to weigh in, those of you who haven't had a chance to do that. I just want to say one thing about this level of discussion and also the focus on some of the specificity of the discussion of some of our neighborhood planning concepts that are embodied in the plan. To me, the important thing about adopting and approving this plan is that it puts in place a process for the town of Guilford to continue to discuss and deal with these issues in the future. It says that we recognize this as something that the town has to deal with, hopefully through the Board of Selectmen, to create the implementing authorities that we've been talking about, or some variation on that, and we continue to move down the road towards addressing what almost everyone believes is a significant concern that the town has, given all the resources that we have invested in the coastal area, all the wonderful neighborhoods that we have in the coastal area and so forth. So before we launch into further kind of technical discussions, please, anyone wants to say something or ask a question?
George, I have a question and a few comments. A very short one. So the first question you mentioned...
You can also...
Yes, Tom Scotchless of 33 Seaside Avenue.
Earlier on this evening, you mentioned something about state statutes, and I'm not sure if you meant that state statute requires coastal towns to have a coastal resilience plan. Is it a requirement or a state statute to have a
I
plan?
haven't quoted the relevant line there, which is that within your comprehensive planning process, what the state, I guess, calls a comprehensive plan, what we call the plan of conservation and development, it has to address coastal resilience in some form or another. That could be very minimal comment, that could be a more robust one.
Okay, and I just have a few of my
Excuse me,
own.
let me, Chuck.
Just what Kevin was referring to, there was a law passed in 2013 that amended 823, which is the statute that says both the process of what you have to do when you adopt or amend your plan of conservation and development. One of the subsections says a list of all the things you have to consider. So technically what it did is the language reads, in preparing such plan of conservation development, the commission or any special committee shall consider the following, blah, blah, blah. It lists a whole bunch of things, infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. And then they added to the list sea level change scenarios published by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration and technical report, blah, blah, blah. So what this says is that you're required, when you prepare or amend your plan, to consider that.
We've clearly gone, well beyond that minimum requirement.
Right.
It's to our credit, I believe, but yes, go ahead.
That's clear. So I have just a few comments regarding that. Some of them go to Kevin's comments in design or facilities or infrastructure improvements that are part of the plan. I question whether or not those specific attributes of the plan need to be required in the plan when we already have building codes and ordinance in the town of Guilford that address some of those issues. For example, you wouldn't necessarily need a plan to take action on best engineering principles or practices to raise a road elevation. We've already done that in Quarry Road without a plan. We already have ordinances in town that require when you're making improvements to a dwelling, whether it's a consequence of a desired expansion or the result of damage due to a storm, if you're doing more than 50% improvement to such a dwelling, you need to bring it up to present codes and standards, which would include the requirements of FEMA. I only merely asked the question, are all the key attributes of the plan actually necessary in such a plan? I'm not here to say yes or no. I just think those are questions that we should all ask ourselves.
Just very briefly, those are both really good questions. I think the infrastructure question is a good one. There are two things, two reasons why they should be included in a plan, in my opinion. One is so that the decision makers of the town who have to allocate scarce resources to making infrastructure improvements have some kind of guideline to go on. And two, the presence or the availability of a plan that's well thought out and current, I think enables us to do a better job in competing for resources when we're applying for grants and other outside sources of funding. I think that's been talked about quite a bit as one of the major reasons why it's important to do this. In terms of regulatory changes, it's certainly true that you can make regulatory changes or propose them. My way of thinking is, again, better process. If you have a plan that first, in a conceptual way, outlines potential regulatory changes and also links those changes to other community planning goals and objectives, it makes the regulatory changes more meaningful and more likely to be successful, in my opinion.
Thank you, George. That answers my question.
Anyone else like to say anything? Yes, you want the microphone?
My name is Alan Brown. I live at Quarry Road in Guilford here. And we've been looking into this for...
I want to use the microphone. There you go.
We've been looking into this for the last 3 months. And the problems I see, I read this thing over, I see is basically 3 parts of this for the discussion. Number 1 is your sea level rises, which I see as a projection. Projection is maybe we're going to have it, maybe we're not going to have it. We're not sure, but this is what we predict. Then you have global warming. Every time I read something about global warming, in the same sentence I see assumption, assuming. So all this stuff is good. We need to do it. But just remember, this scare of this sea rise, it sounds like I'm going to have to look out my window every day. They're talking about 3 feet in 100 years. Anybody in here going to be around 100 years? And within that 100 years, we're going to be on the moon. If they haven't figured out how to solve this problem in 100 years, and if we don't figure it out, and we will figure it out, we will. But this scare of this sea level rising irritates me. I understand we have a problem, but it's not as hysterical as it is. Sandy wiped out New Jersey, not the sea level. Sandy did it, okay? So, in my 3 things I was saying is sea level rising, 1, global warming was the other thing, and the third thing is the thing that I'm interested in. Do we want this plan for our town? Now, first of all, from what I see, this plan is strictly something that we are blessing. It doesn't mean the state is going to buy it or the federal government's going to buy it, and they won't if they want to change their mind. You can write all you want into this thing, but eminent domain is in this thing. I don't care if you shake it, whatever you do with it. You look at it, it's not in there. It's not in there. The state can put it in there. The federal government can put it in there. And remember, you people that own property, you're only one person. You want to go to bat with the federal government? You haven't got anywhere near the money you're going to need for that. So we have to think of ourselves first, all right? The next thing I wrote down was the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut is interested in whatever they have on their agendas. It may or may not be you and I. If they want our property, they can find a way to get it. They've done it in New London. You can be there 4 generations. They don't care. They'll give you what they think is fair, and you're out of there. It's to benefit the majority, is what they say. Second of all, the state of Connecticut should be doing the roads over, okay? What we have to deal with in this state, or in this town of ours, is evacuation. Something's very important. That's something we need to get onto. The roads, 146, as this gentleman showed you here, it's terrible. You get a lot of rain, you're not going anywhere if you live up in my area. You're not going to. These are the things that need to be addressed, okay? This thing is a piece of paper. I read it, and it's all, I don't see any money there. He just said he's got millions of dollars. Millions of dollars? What are you going to do with the millions of dollars? Can you answer me that? Are you going to put up a dike to save Seaside? I'll tell you what's going to happen in Seaside. The people that own that property, that want to be here, are going to do it themselves. It won't be the state of Connecticut that's going to help them. Okay? There was millions of dollars bunch of you people probably contributed to for New Jersey. Did you see what happened to a lot of it? Where did it go? Oh, it disappeared. It went back into the government. It was gone. The people didn't even get it. All right? We have to take care of our own town, and we need to do it ourselves. And I'm not saying this isn't a good plan. I'm just saying I don't trust the federal government, and I don't trust the state. Like somebody once said, the Democratic way is a terrible, terrible system. But what do we got that's better? Okay, we'll live with it and we'll work with it, but I'm saying that I think we need to keep an eye on what's going on. So we are, basically what we're doing is we are giving our blessing to this program. And when the state of Connecticut can't even pass a budget, you want to trust them with whether or not they're going to come in with eminent domain sometime down the road? No, he has no plans for it right now. But what about 10 years from now? We had 2 storms, and it's like the end of the world came. I built my house because 1938, and 1938 was the last serious storm we had, and that was 8 feet above sea level. This one was 15. We had 2 catastrophic stuff coming at us, and that's why we had the problem. We may or may not see it in the future. I can predict it, but I can't say the answer to it. So I'm saying to you, what needs to be done in this town is going to be done by us, the people, and your first selectman and all the people that are in there. Mitigation, our commission is in there looking at things that need to be done. We're going to start pounding at the state about doing the roads and everything. But I'm telling you, we're in a deficit. I don't see them coming down here building roads. 3 months ago, we weren't in that deficit, but today we are all of a sudden. So my point is, I don't trust the federal government. I mean, I don't hate them, but I'm very leery of them. And the same thing with the state of Connecticut. If you can't control your own backyard, what have I got to do to worry about mine? That's how I feel about that. I just got one more thing, and I'll let you have it, okay?
Yes, sir.
The word eminent domain scares me, and you know that because from what I just told you. I don't want to know about eminent domain. I don't want him to lose his house or anybody else. If you've been here generations and you want to stay here and you love this town, I don't want to hear about it. It would be better if you just got out of there because you had 3 storms. If you have a problem, what they're doing right now is they're lifting those houses up and they're making them so they're going to be okay. If they have a storm, they say, okay, we'll live with it. It's their house. And I don't want to see them lose it. Thank you very much.
Just point out that this is a town of Guilford plan, it's not a state plan. Kevin and I just work with the town and we're trying to do what we think is the best thing for the town. I know our consultants are too, and I know the commission as well. So other people, somebody, yes. You don't have to come with the if you want.
John Bracchio, 90 Seaside Avenue. I wasn't actually going to make any comments. I had submitted, for the last hearing, I wasn't able to make it, so I had submitted a letter with my comments of my review of the plan. What I'm commenting to right now is some of the comments that I made were apparently answered in the document that was handed out earlier, and George also summarized those. The essence of my comments before as a resident of Seaside were related to Chapter 7. In Chapter 7, there were a few examples of what would happen in sea level rise scenarios, and I'm not going to debate what it's going to be, how high it's going to be in the future. I think we're experiencing sea level rise. I think that's a fact based on data. How high it'll go in the future, we'll find out, I guess, eventually. My comments were that the 2 scenarios don't actually, that are in the plan, and what George indicated are in the document that was handed out earlier, I read very quickly, said that those are only examples of a couple types of scenarios that would occur in Seaside, and they may not, something might actually be different when you have the neighborhood plan it. And so those 2 scenarios, tell me if I'm wrong, but are going to be put into the appendix because they're not mandated, they're just examples. So here's my concern. My concern is those 2 scenarios reflect, I guess, what was referred to earlier as a strategic retreat from the neighborhood. And that's a potential scenario, obviously. Someone reading this document after it's accepted, who was considering to move into town or considering to move in that neighborhood, would say, wow, if these are what's going to happen in that neighborhood, there's no way that I would purchase real estate in that neighborhood. And therefore, the real estate value in that neighborhood is zero for resale. The goals of the plan that were stated earlier, and I think they're great, and I think the answers that were given out earlier tonight were great, were that the goal is adaptation for sea level rise, whatever it is. And the goal is to enhance or increase property values, and that's a good goal. These two scenarios, even though they're just examples of scenarios, don't do that. And so what I would like to see is also an example of a bold adaptation plan for that neighborhood to be included as one of those examples. Could be crazy, it could be unreasonable, it could be not economically viable, but it's another plan, just like those two are examples. There was a comment earlier that we should do strategic retreat, the gentleman earlier, and the levels of sea level rise are going to go to 4 or 7 feet in the future. And the city of New York has recognized that, and the U.S. Navy has recognized that, and Long Island has recognized it, and all kinds of other communities that are at similar elevations. They're not planning to do strategic retreat. They're planning to do adaptation. They're planning to come up with plans to protect or adapt to the sea level rise in those areas. They're not, so that type of a scenario that these other entities have recognized have come up with a different example. So if you understand what I'm saying, I just would like to see included in there some sort of a bold way that would say, okay, here's 2 scenarios that we have now that show strategic retreat in Seaside. Here's another one that wouldn't be strategic retreat. You know, for example, we're thinking out of the box. We're dredging down there and we're hauling, I don't know how many yards of material out to the middle of Long Island Sound that got deposited there over the years, and a lot during Sandy. That's a lot of material that could be used for adaptation measures, berms or other ways of raising the wetlands or the salt marshes. Those sorts of bold sorts of things are what you're seeing being done in other communities. Staten Island, Long Island are doing those sorts of bold initiatives to save their neighborhoods and to save the property values in there. And I just would like to see that as an example, and whether it gets implemented or not, we don't know, but I think it might not, if that's shown as an example, I think then it'll have less negative impact on the real estate values in that neighborhood. So hopefully I made sense, but yeah.
What you said made a lot of sense and illustrates exactly the point we were trying to make earlier. I think we do want to withdraw those 2 examples from the text of the plan itself, because even though we've qualified it in as much language as we could, the fact that this was a hypothetical plan, it's one example of this neighborhood planning process that we think we want to implement. By including it in the primary document itself, it gives the impression to some people apparently that this is somehow a plan that we're endorsing or that we're recommending or we think is most likely to occur, which is not the case. The intent was to illustrate in a very creative way, especially with regard to Seaside, in my opinion, what one possible neighborhood planning scenario would look like. And I agree totally that we want many more of these kinds of plans, not just in Seaside, but in all of our coastal neighborhoods. And hopefully with the endorsement of that concept by the Planning and Zoning Commission, the town decision makers can help our neighborhoods move these things forward through whatever means necessary to develop either more realistic plans or alternative plans. I think that illustrates how this process will be implemented in the future.
George, and that's great, and John, brilliant. We should leave room for that. And my problem with the way it's written right now, and I'm reading verbatim from this plan, finally, the town should consider special tax districts as a vehicle for funding. This source could be particularly appropriate where the benefits of acquisition or other public improvement are limited to a particular neighborhood or group of property owners. So there's mechanisms in here for the taking of the land by the town. That's in here. What I don't see in here are things like John has mentioned, where we're promoting or endorsing alternate ideas either than that. If they're in here, I'm just not seeing them. Are they in here?
I think they are in the infrastructure area for sure. Now, what that particular section relates to is not that there would be any sort of coercive land acquisition, but that's talking about a possible strategy where there would be specific, if the benefits of a public improvement, land acquisition, infrastructure, whatever, accrue to a specific neighborhood, it's possible for the town to consider ways where that neighborhood pays for those improvements, not the town as a whole, through like a special tax district or something like that. So that could be either used for infrastructure improvement that benefited only a specific neighborhood or a small group of people, or could be a land acquisition, a park development, or something like that.
So, and that's great. And I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
In recognition of what Sid said, you know, we could have a potential property where we're at 6 feet above. And, you know, today we could build build a house on that or build something on that. And for 25, 30 years, it would be fine. But under this, and if I'm misreading it, please, you know, I'm not getting it. Tell me I'm not getting it. But for the life of the structure that's built, we have to take into consideration tidal rise. So, you know, in light of what Sid brought out about not building on those pieces of property that today are buildable and would be sustainable for 50 years, you know, is that not eminent domain if we say, no, you can't build on that? You know.
It's not. I'll let Chuck expand on the concept, but the idea, first of all, that I think that law enables us to do what you're suggesting there. It doesn't require them to do it. I think that's an important distinction. It enables us to adopt higher freeboard standards, for example, for new construction, anticipating that sea level rise might occur. Those are the kind of changes in our regulatory framework that we could implement if we wanted to. This law gives us the ability to do that and gives us the science behind it to do that if we want to. It's entirely up to us to do that, to go through the normal zoning process if we want to do that.
So you're saying that this document would act as a structure for us to say, all right, you know, in 60 years that property is going to be in order. So now we're going to say no.
We're going to say, I'm sorry.
You know, I mean, I think it's the way that we developed the seaside plans was, or the way that we would go through the process of developing plan is really bottom up, and that's part of what we're trying to explain in this that there needs to be a process of communication. So I think ultimately we would try to build on the goals at the local scale and think about what the longer term vision is, and think about these ideas of innovation and where that's potentially feasible. But you know, we're trying to be constructive, so sensible planning in terms of reducing risk and increasing egress capacity, and essentially being strategic over the longer term is the intention of that bill, but it's not in any way intended to reduce economic development or to reduce the opportunity for the town to build its own community. And I think the Seaside Avenue plan shows an increase in economic development around the train station and down along the roadway. So if you count the number of units that are proposed over time, it's an increase. The question there has to do more with give and take. And I think this question of give and take is something that we see as an important way of evaluating what could be at risk in the future and how to think strategically at the town scale, particularly with egress. It seems like egress is actually in some ways, a bigger issue for the town's function over time. And we want to use this as a means to identify concerns and to think about how we prioritize decisions at the town level. So it's, I think, much more in that vein. I understand what you're saying in terms of the concern of whether this opens up challenges, and I understand that. I think it's a very fair set of questioning that is worth investigating. But I don't think that in any way we're suggesting that it's not the intention or the means of what we're trying to push forward.
Right, but the actual, like if you're a property owner on Seaside Avenue, whose property is at 6 feet, and 50 years from now that's going to be in the water, but today it's a buildable lot. That person has a tremendous interest in this, because we could say, if we adopt this, that we need to consider the long-term ramifications and not give him the permit today. Whereas if we don't, we say, all right, well, you know what, you're buying that property, you're taking the risk upon yourself, you're investing your money, it's your decision if you want to do it. So by adopting this, are we not taking away the right of the individual to make their decision on whether they want to sink their money into that property? And to Sid's point, should we be taking it away? I mean, you know, is that something we should take away from people? Because that's really where this comes in.
Certainly adopting the plan doesn't do that. The plan, I guess the consequence of your point is that the plan gives the commission the rationale, if that's the right word, for considering new regulatory approaches or permitting limitations that could be adopted, which would have to go through the normal zoning process. And if those provisions of the regulation were adopted and they had the consequence of impacting property values or what owners can do with their property, then that could very well be the case. But that's the nature of zoning. Zoning does restrict what you can do with your property. There's no question about it.
Yeah, right. And just to shift gears just for a second, Ken, and I'm sorry to not, and I'll stop after this. Someone had mentioned to me that the Quarry Road, built on rock, built on gravel, over time was sinking into the muck, and that's why the water was running over it. And do we have any elevations of the original roads when they were built and what they are now? And is it in fact that they're sinking into the mud, or is it that the ocean's coming up over them?
I do not know about elevations before. We just have the elevations of the asphalt now.
Right.
So
we don't know if they're sinking.
It's uncertainty if it was sinking, or we know sea level rise has been increasing. We do have a chart just shown before of a linear increase in sea level rise. So we do know that there's sea level rise.
Right, but is it being made worse by the fact that the roadways are actually slowly sinking and we have to build them up higher again? And are the new ones that we're building them in a way that they're not going to sink into the muck, so we don't have to do this again in 20 years?
That's something the town engineer has to answer. I don't know. There's standards there.
All right, so I'll stop talking.
Rich, just a point on that, the original grant request for the Quarry Road stated that the Quarry Road was sinking.
The grant request said it was sinking in the mud?
Yes.
Oh, okay, well, I guess that answers the question. All right, thank you.
I just want to answer one question we had before. You're talking about is with acquisition. Acquisition in the report is not talking about eminent domain. It's talking about a purchase or sale of property between two willing buyers, or a willing buyer and a seller. When we use that term, it's not we're going to take your property. It's potentially a property where a homeowner has been flooded out 3 times and they want to sell. And the property might be next to a park that we have, which we might want to expand our park use or increase public access to the water. And if there's a person that's interested in selling it, we laid out steps and options of how that sale can be processed through. So that's what we're talking about in terms of acquisition. Acquisition, we're also looking in the plan is we identified Seaside Avenue, Sheridan Park down there, potentially could be flooded out with sea level rise. Acquisition of another piece of inland property to make up for that loss of the field. So that's concepts of acquisition that we're looking at in terms of the plan there. So it's not direct eminent domain, but it's after a storm, somebody's just doesn't want to be there and wants to sell their property to the town, and we laid out in the plan so the Land Acquisition Commission, the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance know the steps that we can move forward with picking up a piece of land between willing buyer or willing seller and the town. Or another emergency.
Potentially, we could write into this document that it can, the eminent domain feature can only be used on a town level by a willing seller and never without their permission.
It wouldn't be eminent domain if it's a willing seller.
This happens all the time in land acquisition. There are a lot of times where the longtime property owner passes away, the estate, the heirs of the children pick it up, the children are spread across the country, they want to sell the property back to the town. Or there are other times the town takes a look and says, there are properties that are close to property that we own, we'd like to join them, and we'll make an offer to the owner. Sometimes it's accepted, sometimes it's not.
So where does that money come from now? From the town's fund?
Yes, there's actually some bonding that's out there, and in addition, I believe the cell tower.
Yeah, we collect money from the cell tower revenue, and 10 years ago or something like that, we went for bonding for $5 million for land acquisition, and there's still some money in there, and it's divided into different sections. Class A land, which is passive recreation, Class B land, which is recreational land for soccer fields and those type of structures, and Class C, which are for town facilities, buildings, schools, those type of things.
And that's
So there's-
an arm's length transaction at fair market value. We get an appraisal and we make an offer based on that, and the owner can accept it or reject it.
Yep.
We have some, first, Mr. West.
Harrison West at 9 Park Street. A question of information about really boring scientific detail that was addressed at a meeting on coastal resilience at the library, and that they separated sea level rise and coastal subsidence. Are those two terms united in this discussion?
The short answer is that as part of that local effect that you have to consider, there are parts of the country that makes the problem worse. Places where the land is emerging, which makes the problem less worse. So you have to consider where you are locally. You can't just look at a global prediction. And so I hope that answers your question.
In that presentation, they said the coast of Connecticut is subsiding.
I don't know exactly what the level of subsidence is. Jim, do you want to speak to that for a second?
Yes, it's Louis, not very fast, other places.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I just have one comment. My name's Deb Bloom, and I live in a coastal community in Guilford. I hope the commission passes this plan. I'd be proud to be a part of our community in moving forward and taking all the steps to plan for our neighborhood, which I love dearly, and I'm raising 2 kids who also love it dearly. So I'd be very proud of Guilford to pass this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's, I'm sure we don't have anybody who wants to talk, who hasn't spoken yet, before we go to the people for a second. Anyone? Any comments from? Go ahead. Yes.
I just want to add that some of the concerns I hear in Mr. Meyer's questions and what John had said is congruent with the comment I said to this meeting last week, or last month, when we had the meeting, or the last meeting, is the plan heavily emphasizes retreat and land acquisition as a means of coastal resilience rather than more positive engineered solutions to protect existing lands. And the gentleman there from Yale mentioned that the plan does include improvements to the coastal development areas, but it only shows that at the new mean high tide level, or as the water line increases, there's more development there. But the plan, what I think concerns a lot of us in the public is the plan's tone and emphasis is on land acquisition and retreat, and not on engineered improvements and development and infrastructure. I would feel much more comfortable with the plan being passed if it had additional wording or revision that included more positive means of coastal resilience rather than what is perceived as negative means of coastal resilience.
I think that's a good suggestion, and again, that illustrates the point that we've been trying to make here. We're not going to create a perfect plan right now. This is a process that's going to be carried forward in the future. I think I just want to make one comment. There is one significant infrastructure, protected infrastructure project that is described in the plan in some detail, and that relates to the West River, the mouth of the West River improvements that were discussed, including a variety of engineering improvements. The town actually put together quite a piece of work, a grant acquisition, a grant project application to fund that project. Unfortunately, it wasn't funded, but it is an example of a fairly major infrastructure improvement project that had as its objective the protection of coastal properties. So we're by no means attempting to discourage those kinds of activities. I think we do want to include others in the planning process in the future if we can identify those that make sense. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Richard Hamel, on Neck Road. And Neck Road is actually Circle Beach Road, Madison. I've been there for 37 years, have a Madison address, a Madison phone number. The Madison people plow the road. And having read the report, that's probably an area, there's 10 and a half homes there that are Guilford. 3 of us live there year-round. That would probably be a strategic retreat or an area that if a real sea level rise, that they might want to take us out of there, let it go back to nature. There's a marsh there, there's a beach there. My point is, I find it hard to believe that this plan, which I agree with, by the way, will not devalue the homes on Neck Road. I find it very hard to believe that somebody is going to feel that these homes are now going to be worth more.
I guess I would just ask the question, is it the plan that is causing that property value devaluation, if in fact is occurring, or is it the phenomena, the physical phenomena itself that's occurring, or the likelihood of projected phenomena? I think one of the things we've said about Neck Road, it is one of the more vulnerable areas of Guilford for sure, is that we'd like to solicit the involvement of Neck Road residents, and a number of them have expressed interest in this neighborhood planning process. I think that's exactly the kind of area where we want to give a real high priority to that if we can. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add to that one of the things we're finding is that egress is an important near-term concern. And kind of it creates a slow, dull effect on people's value of their property and potential future home buyers. So I think the Old Quarry Road is an example of one of the roads that was prioritized. Maybe that's something that we could consider including in the document to show the way in which Guilford is considering the issues of egress, to go back to your point about the importance of also showing infrastructure and the value of infrastructure as a component of the plan. Because in fact, Guilford is doing that by making choices about road-raising efforts. And so, maybe there's a way of it. I think those kinds of comments are important to consider, because we do want to take a balanced approach. And ultimately, I think if we are able to address some of the egresses, which, by the way, does go back to the question of prioritization, goes back to your points about thinking about where the best economic gain could be by understanding what the road-raising strategy is, how you prioritize certain projects over others. I think if we develop these approaches, then we can essentially show that Guilford is coastally adapting to these concerns, which shorefront communities face across the Connecticut coast. That by coastally adapting, by being strategic and pushing that into prioritization for the town, that puts Guilford in a stronger position in the longer term in terms of property value. Because a certain amount of this is perception of risk, and it's changing our understanding of the concern of these flood events, and changing our lifestyle, our expectations of our homes, and kind of living with more water. And so part of this is about perception, and reducing that perception of risk, and increasing the resiliency in terms of egress access.
Just to repeat something I said earlier that maybe I didn't make totally clear, and that is, it's very important for the town, given even just looking at a very narrow fiscal kind of perspective, that if 20% of the tax revenues of the town come from coastal neighborhoods, the last thing we want to do is suppress coastal real estate values. We want to enhance coastal real estate values, because we know that living on the coast is one of the most valuable assets that the town has. The opportunity to live on the coast, and our coastal communities, our neighborhoods, and natural resources, and all the other things are really what make Guilford special. That's what this plan is really all about. And we're doing this. We're doing this in order to enhance the value of these neighborhoods, the attractiveness of these neighborhoods, and by ignoring, in my opinion, what appears to be happening, certainly that experts suggest is happening, by ignoring that, it would be very foolish. I think Chuck wants to comment. He's done a little on the research on that law.
Yes, hi. The chair, you had asked if I was aware of any eminent domain laws in the past couple of years. Mr. Griffin had mentioned the House Bill 5128 from 2012, and I said, no, I wasn't aware of anything of eminent domain, and I was using my iPhone, able to look up the bill. The bill was not adopted. It was proposed, but it wasn't enacted. I think that was Mr. Gale that was his recollection. And what it was is, interesting enough, it related to coastal site plans. Actually, your authority, when you consider coastal site plans all the time. Right now, the law says that there's nothing in the Coastal Site Plan Act that would authorize you to deny rebuilding after casualty loss. So basically, if someone could, there's a sentence in there, and then it added an except to that. And it said, except that if there's substantial damage to the property, and the cost of restoring it is 50% of the fair market value, and the building is damaged again, so it has to be damaged twice, then you can have the option of denying a coastal site plan, whereas before you couldn't. But if you do, it's considered a taking of property for which you need to compensate the property owner. So it would effectively, it wouldn't transfer title, which is what we think of in takings, but it would be effectively the state saying you have imposed an easement or conservation restriction on that by not letting them rebuild after this casualty loss. And if you do that, you've got to compensate them. So in some ways, that could be considered a pro-property rights element, although right now the statute does say you can't rebuild after, nothing prevents you from rebuilding after casualty loss. So that's what that is. The bottom line was that it wasn't
enlighten me. Let's say you have an acre on the water and a house that's worth, the structure is worth $200,000. So it gets hit once by waves and it has $100,000 in damage, 50%. And it happens the second time and it has $100,000 in damage. So at that point, do we, by that law, and I know we're splitting hairs, are we saying we have to pay for the whole property in the house or just the house? Or
No, that law wasn't enacted, so that's not effective. It never got enacted. It never got enacted.
Okay, so we don't have...
Right. It was never done. That was the proposed bill, but it was not enacted. And it just authorized you to, because they would have had to come in with a coastal site plan for rebuilding anything. And it would have authorized you to deny it and said if you did, you have to pay him something. I don't know what it was. It's hypothetical.
And we didn't even have to deny it, is that right? What did we even have?
No, you wouldn't have to deny it. And frankly, putting that taking language in there was incentive for you not to deny it. That's why I thought whoever proposed that was probably thinking that you better think twice before you deny these things. You're going to be paying a lot of money. I mean, that was my take on it.
Well, the bottom line is the law that was referred to is in fact not law.
Right, exactly.
So that entire discussion actually does not apply to this decision.
Yeah, just as to whether 5128 exists, it died, so it was never noted.
Is there any other short comments? Anyone just like to say, I really love you guys, you're doing a great job, or anything like that?
Okay, sure.
Okay, appreciate it.
I just want to make something. Should I wait for this?
You limit yourself to 2 minutes to talk. If you want to go over 2 minutes, we have to change the tape.
Okay, yeah, it should be quick. Work for the Nature Conservancy, we've been trying to help this happen. And one of the fundamental principles that we operate by is that we do not do eminent domain and would not support anything that in any way enhanced eminent domain. And we've had discussions about it and working on the plan. So I just want to be clear that if there's any extrapolation or interpretation that suggests that there could be any increased chance of that, that would be bad and wrong. That would be something we would not support. So I think the suggestion that was made by Walter Verbeer is something that, in my mind, is a great thing, because we're really trying to be clear that that's the last resort and it would not be anything that this plan should use. It was pointed out that it's an existing authority the town has. We can't stop that authority from existing, but we don't want this plan to be used in any way for eminent domain. So the stronger language we can make, the better, I guess. And as I said, we would have a hard time supporting it if it didn't. It wasn't clear on that point.
Perfect. Thank you.
Nathan, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Regarding what your statement you just made.
Yes. So right after the tape gets changed.
We're going to change the tape.
We got to change the tape.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're back. Our plan is to have two presenters who have some ideas that they want to share with us. Kurt Griffin first is going to come forward and make a fairly brief presentation, and then Sid is going to follow him with some questions for Chuck, and then also a presentation on his part. Then we're going to recommend the commission continue the public hearing to April, the third Wednesday in April. I'm not sure what that date is. And then the commission wants to do a little bit of regular business in order that we can get out of here by 10 o'clock approximately, maybe a few minutes after, but depending on how long everything's going to go. So that's the game plan, right? Yep. Everybody good with that?
Okay, thank you very much, George. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to make this presentation. I would just like to start off with just some general comments. Not too many of us around in 1895. Anybody? No? Okay. 1895 was the first climate scare that scientists, politicians, and the media foisted on the world. And that was for global warming. They said that the coastal cities would be inundated because the Greenland ice sheet would melt and the Antarctic ice sheet would melt, and all kinds of terrible things were going to happen, and there's going to be mass extinctions. Within a few years, that didn't happen, and everybody just kind of lost interest. About 1925 or so, in that range, global cooling became the thing, and they blamed CO2 initially from coal-fired plants for the initial warming, and then when they had the cooling phase came along in the 1920s, they said it was aerosols from coal-fired energy plants. Then in 1940 it got warm again, and they said, we're not going to have the ice age that they thought they were going to have in the 20s. Then in the 40s, they said, it's going to be global warming, and the coastal city is going to be flooded, and it's going to be terrible. And then probably several of you would remember in the 60s and 70s, that they were saying it was going to have another ice age, and it's because of aerosols from coal-fired power plants and all that kind of stuff. And then in the 80s and 90s, they started with the global warming again. It's a 60-year cycle, 30 years up, 30 years down. It's been going on for ad infinitum. So that's just a little history. This is not the first one. This is the longest lasting one, and we're already going into the cooling phase of this thing, and now they're saying global warming is causing global cooling. Just a quick comment was made that CO2 is going to continue to rise, and that's going to cause unstoppable global warming. There's a consensus, and this, that, and the other thing. I disagree with all those statements. However, the carbon dioxide has a 15-micron band of radiation, and it is saturated. Over 400 parts per million, there's almost no effect whatsoever. There has been no increase in water vapor. Carbon dioxide on its own cannot cause global warming per se, and the water vapor is the positive feedback that makes it all happen, and that's not happening. So there's an awful lot here to be digested, I'm sorry to say. But at any rate, I have some questions that are very technical, and I don't know if Nathan, if you can answer these, because I guess you gave the science presentation there. The report says that they used 7 global climate models, and there's only a couple of global climate models that actually are functional, according to Phil Jones, the head of the Climatic Research Unit, supplies most of the information for the IPCC. And he says they don't work because of how they handle clouds. So could you tell us which 7 global climate models you use by name? Do you have those information?
I can answer that question.
Okay.
It wasn't 7 global, it
GCM.
There were 7 institutions around the world that comprised of where the original TNC projections came from.
That may be what you say, but in the report it said global climate model, GCMs.
Correct. I was also a partial author in the report, and this just might be a typo error that we will have to revisit.
Well, it's not only in this report, it was also in the same basic report that was presented in New York City, and they used the same language.
Understood.
Okay?
Yes.
So that would need to be corrected, I suspect.
Yes.
Okay.
Or at least revisited for clarity and also communicated.
Okay. Also, it mentions 3 emissions scenarios. Do we have the numbers associated with those emission scenarios, and how does that differentiate between emissions and the resultant concentrations in the atmosphere? Do you have that data?
Not a
I don't have it.
I'm not saying you got to have it right now. Is that something that you could make available?
Yes.
I
Okay.
don't see why not, absolutely.
Okay.
But I think I would emphasize the point I made earlier, which is that the projections we used range from low, medium, and high. They are within the range that has now been reported in the National Climate Assessment, which in many ways serves as a much more authoritative source on these questions. And we're also saying that we're not picking any one of these projections. We are simply trying to show that they exist, and here's what they look like. So I think spending a lot of time trying to nitpick the details is valuable in a certain sense, but I think it risks losing the bigger picture and the bigger point.
No, I understand. I am terribly concerned about the high levels of predictions of sea level rise.
Not predictions.
Huh?
Projections.
Projections, I know. I recall a discussion that I had with a fellow who mentioned projections, and he said, no, they're projections. And then within 10 minutes, he used the word predictions 5 times. So we look at those. I have a question regarding point number 3. It's on the last page, page 8 of 8 on your paper that you submitted. It talks about they use 2 LiDAR data sets with an accuracy of approximately 6 inches. The only 2 data sets that are mentioned in Dr. Welch's paper, the Assessing Coastal Vulnerability to Sea Level Rise in Southern New England, a case study from the Nature Conservancy, was a Connecticut LiDAR which had a RSME, root mean square error, of 68 centimeters, and that's a whole lot more than 6 inches. And that would be like a 67% confidence band. So that's relatively, that's nowhere near 6 inches.
So I'm not the scientist who was directly involved.
Yeah.
Adam Welsh would be the person, and I'm just trying to see who could, if this was an important point, we'd be happy to provide clarity on that.
Well, if you look at his paper and you calculate out using the formula that he has, and he's modified the formula from a fellow by the name of Dean Gesh, it comes out 52 inches when you add a 1 meter sea level rise to the root mean square error of the Connecticut LiDAR data set, and then minus a correction factor, okay, to convert from NAVD to mean high water, okay? And it comes out to 52 inches. And of all the numbers that it could come out to, 52 inches seems like kind of a coincidence. If that's his paper came out to 52 inches. So now it also says in that paper that the tool does not support sea level rise less than 1 meter. And the main reason for that is because the low level of the based on the error of the Connecticut LiDAR study, okay, comes out to be minus 1 inch. So if your range is 0, essentially, to 52 inches, but that didn't, the zero never got used.
Well, I mean, one of the nice things about working with the Guilford, the town planner, and Kevin and others is that they're always really looking for the latest information that's available. And so the idea is that Guilford should be working with what's most pertinent and most critical in terms of the latest and best science, right? So that we are making strong decisions. And so I think the 2012 global sea level rise scenarios that Kevin pointed out and that we printed is a document that's seen as you know, that's recognized currently as being the latest and sort of best understanding of the situation we face, that's adopted by the Navy and by New York City. And that's what we're trying to do, is always look for the latest information and trying to feed that information back into the decision-making process. So I think your feedback is great. It's great to get.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I'm getting to a point here. I'm sorry if I'm looking for some details, because these are questions that I've had for some time. If you're looking at the Connecticut LIDAR and the variation of that, and you're using this basic formula that in this assessing coastal vulnerability, et cetera, you're not talking about sea level rise of 52 inches if you used, in fact, that formula, okay? You're talking about the uncertainty of where the land is, how high the land is. The elevation data set, which you're talking about in number 3 on page 8, okay, has nothing to do with sea level rise. It has to do, there's a mean sea level rise that you're starting with, okay? But you are, what you're saying, for instance, as an example, if I was standing on the shore today and the water was just touching my toes, and I stayed there till 2080s, okay? What they're saying here in this paper that Adam Welchum put together was that the water for a 3 foot, a 1 meter sea level rise, okay, that the water would be somewhere between chest high and an inch below my feet. Okay, that's what this report is talking about. It's not saying that's going to be sea level. The sea level rise is 39 inches. Okay? This is talking about an uncertainty, and this is what it actually is.
It might be more helpful if you would kind of like state a conclusion to the commission as to what you feel about these things, rather than have a kind of cross back and forth indirect examination.
All right, well, let me just...
The report, who isn't even here.
Right, I'm sorry that he's not. I wish he was, because that'd be great.
These are kind of highly technical discussions, and maybe we could certainly try to facilitate a discussion between you and him, and you can perhaps get these things resolved.
Okay, let me get to that was the technical part of it.
Thank you.
And we're going to go, this is going to get a lot simpler. I happened to catch the tail end, and I saw George and Rich talking on the February 18th, I guess it was planning and zoning, right? February 18th, yeah. And you made the statement that sea level rise was definitely accelerated. I'd like to just submit this to the commission. This is NOAA data, and you can peruse that. There's no acceleration in any of the NOAA data. There was a Harvard professor who had a paper last year that said that, oh, all these people have been doing sea level rise all these years. They got it wrong. They don't know what they're doing. But I know, and the sea level rise was much less prior to the satellite era, and now it's accelerating. But
so this is, the source here is whatsupwiththat.com.
That's the first person that assembled it. The data is from NOAA. All the charts are directly off of a NOAA website.
That's WATTSUPWITH.
That's the author.
CHAT.com.
That's where the article appeared. The data is from NOAA. NOAA. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there was another. Okay. Specifically, there's just a couple of little points here. I really objected to the reading through the thing, the number of times that I saw increasing frequency and intensity of storms. We've had the lowest number of tornadoes in U.S. history in the last 3 years straight. Hurricane intensity is down. This is the longest period since the Civil War when a major hurricane has not hit the U.S. mainland. There's a certain amount of luck involved in that, for sure, but to say that a small amount of CO2 increase is going to cause all that, the IPCC has said there's a very low confidence in that. And so I object to those statements and saying that it's a given that we're going to have increased storm frequency and intensity. In addition, I have a real problem with Appendix E. I mean, this is approaching the Community Coastal Resilience Plan as a collective learning process. You read through this thing, there's a thing called the Delphi method, and this is right out of the Delphi method, which is a part of the Agenda 21, which is a UN program, which basically, they're talking about tearing up all the roads and everybody moves out of the country, no private property rights. There's a whole bunch of things involved in that. It's outrageous. But this Delphi method is associated with the UN Agenda 21 Biodiversity Treaty combination. So I just don't see how a collective approach, I mean, that just sounds socialist. And the idea that the individual is somehow subservient to the collective is, totally inappropriate. So,
sorry, we're not entirely familiar with Agenda 21 on the Planning and Zoning Commission. I was wondering if you could just elaborate some of the points involved.
Yeah. Well, Agenda 21 by itself is a problem for most people. It talks about what's the word? There's no individual national governments. It's a one world order under the UN. Unelected officials. There's no more elected officials. They're talking about it's in conjunction with a thing called the Wildlands Project and the Biodiversity Treaty. You can find all this information on a blog that I write. If you're interested, I can give you that. But it basically, they're talking about tearing up all the roads. They're talking about no property rights, and everybody's living in little cubicles. I mean, there's a whole bunch of crazy things involved in that. But I'm sorry, I thought maybe people would be aware of what that was. But at any rate,
Mr. Griffin, can you come to a conclusion here?
Yes, I've got 5 bullet points I'm gonna do.
One.
Yeah. The chart of NAVD level predictions serves no purpose. It is essentially the same as Table 2 in the vulnerability. NAVD is undefined. Nobody doesn't say what it is. And the level of the current NAVD that was used to create the chart is not listed. You can't have an NAVD value without knowing what the reference is. I mean, there's no purpose of that chart. It should be removed. Okay? And that's about it.
Thank you. Sid?
Make sure I'm not taking your stuff.
George, I thought we were going to try to end this thing at 10.
We were going to, yes, but Sid's been waiting very patiently, and I don't want to be the one to tell you.
Well, I don't want to cut it off. I'm sure. I'm just saying.
Let me say this. In your interest, I've got 2 parts. The first part, I think is going to address the questions that you've been wrestling with the assistance of Attorney Andrews. The second part will be much briefer. I've already provided 2 written documents, one on January 7th, which I hope you received. Another one I gave George yesterday.
I received that tonight.
Okay, fine. So I won't have you suffer through a verbal recitation of those, but I will just cap off a few points based on tonight's hearing. So if you can suffer me for 15 minutes, hopefully.
I don't want to be that said, it's good input. So I think it's important to note that we did not state that everyone's on board.
Chuck, would you join me up here? Okay, I think one of the important things, you've been wrestling with this issue of eminent domain, and I appreciate how difficult and politically sensitive that is, particularly to people who feel they're involved, but I think you're missing the issue. It's a secondary issue. The primary issue is this. If you believe in sea level rise, if you allow for the possibility, and to the credit of the task force, I'm glad they used the intermediate high level or something equivalent to it in their Seaside Avenue presentation, because I think it's the relevant model to use as the probable. If you take that model, the issue is not eminent domain exercised by the town. The issue is eminent domain exercised by Mother Nature. And within that scope, the question is, how does the town facilitate whatever it is we choose to do in that area? Okay? The other important thing to understand is that in the case of Seaside Avenue, with a 3-foot rise within 80 to 100 years, you're not talking about critical impact in 80 to 100 years. You're talking about critical impact potentially in 20 to 30 years when it reaches, let's say, 1.5 feet, because at that point in time, sea level rise will probably be flooding more than the 30 days a year that happens now with seasonal high tide and storms. It'll be flooding maybe 90 days a year, 120 days a year. At what point does that become a non-livable environment by any of a variety of issues? So that's the context in which I think you have to think of response. And eminent domain is one of 2 processes that I think is going to come into play then. So here are a few questions I'd like to pose to Attorney Andrews, because I'm not sure that they've been covered with you in your prior discussions. Number 1, relative to the resilience project and sea level rise, have you counseled the Commission and the Board of Selectmen on the difference between the exercise of powers of eminent domain on the one hand and powers of condemnation?
No, I haven't made a distinction between eminent domain and condemnation.
Is there?
I would say in normal usage, no.
Okay. I know there's a town ordinance about that governs the tearing down of buildings if they become subject or at risk to public health and safety. So I would gather that that is an instance of condemnation by the town. Let's say, for example, that in 20 to 30 years, Seaside Avenue or Neck Road or God only knows what of the low-lying properties is having their land repetitively flooded by sea level rise, and their septic systems are not functioning. Would they still be viable residences? Their leaching fields don't work. Are they considered viable properties at that point, subject to public health and safety, the health codes? You're not the town sanitarian, I know.
No, I'm not.
Okay. If the town sanitarian said, hey, you can't have a house when you can't have a septic system, you've effectively condemned the house, correct? For its purpose as a residence.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you can't use septic disposal, I don't know what the laws are, but yeah, you got a problem. Absolutely.
You got a problem, right. Okay, so whether you want to do anything or not as a commission, if Mother Nature says, I'm going to flood this property on a regular basis, and it's not going to really be usable as a property on that basis, it's been condemned by nature, if not by town ordinance. The question is, does the town want to step in? Does the town have an obligation to step in to do something when that circumstance occurs? And again, that's 20 to 30 years from now. And what's 20 to 30 years from now? Well, if somebody buys that lovely house that was just built on Seaside Avenue and is on the market for $1.3 million, they may have the problem that their investment in that house with sea level rise is not going to outlive the mortgage. And anybody who follows later, you know, the second house you folks have approved to go up there, the people who are raising their houses to FEMA standards, are they going to have a livable residence when they can't sustain their septic systems and when the kids have to go out to catch the bus in galoshes because it happens to be sea level rise around 7:30 in the morning? That's what you have to deal with. That's the bigger problem, okay? So whether Mother Nature condemns the property or the town of Guilford does for reasons of public health and safety, what do you do? Do people need to know about that? Do people need to know today, before they invest, that that's a prospect within the useful life of their time in that property, and or whatever they hope to get from that property when they choose to sell it to somebody else who may or may not come in with knowledge of the circumstance? Could you describe briefly what the circumstances of the town has the responsibility and authority to condemn property in its use at any point in time?
Yeah, I will. Mr. Gale didn't tell me what he was going to ask, so I'm, you know, you love the law school.
No, and I'm
questions,
sorry to
right, no,
kind of put you on the spot, but you know more than we do.
Sure, no, and certainly, and I'll amend a previous answer with a distinction between eminent domain and condemnation. Certainly in law, there's something, eminent domain, which you typically, the paradigm example is, I'm taking your property to build a road. So I'm kicking you out, it's mine. That's one thing. And then there's something called, typically the word inverse is used, inverse condemnation, which is by the regulatory powers of the town, you've so limited the use of the value of the property that they've effectively taken it. And that could be, and you see that it's actually built in the wetlands laws, for example, where if somebody, I think there's a thing actually in the wetlands statute that if by so regulating it, you can't use your property, then that could be called a taking of property that way. So there is that sort of distinction between the actual physical taking and kicking the people out versus the regulatory taking, which is called condemnation. And it could be health, safety, or type of laws which prevent you from doing things, and it may be a law that says you can't rebuild after something comes in. So there is that distinction out there. So yeah.
Okay, so recognizing that distinction now, when an inverse taking occurs, does the town have the obligation to compensate the property owner for the value lost?
Well, if the town does it, then yes. I mean, those are tough cases to prove, but actually, I mean, that again, the wetlands would be an example. There've been few and far between. It's a real burden, but if by so regulating the property that you're deprived of all reasonable use, then you can find it a taking, and someone could potentially get money from the town. But it's by virtue of what the town does, not by what Mother Nature does, if that's your distinction.
It's by virtue of what the town does, but the town in this case is forced to do it by what Mother Nature has done, which gets us back to our opening premise of what is it that's driving your decisions and what tools do you need in order to deal with that force. What obligation does the town have to current or would-be property owners to make them aware of these projections so that they can make decisions in their informed best interest? What obligation do they have as a matter of law?
I'm not aware of anything that we've talked about the amendment to 823 that says the commission has to consider sea level rise. Consider, doesn't say I have to do anything, it says you have to consider it. But I'm not aware of any duty of any government to inform it such that if the government violated the duty, someone could get money from the government for not doing it.
Do people currently sue pharmaceutical companies for failing to properly disclose known or knowable constraints in the use of their product that might negatively affect them? I know that sounds like an obtuse question, but it has a point.
What's the point?
The point is, do you have no less a responsibility if you are allowing people to build on property that you know has the potential of being compromised based on the best science you have available to you. Do you have a responsibility?
My brother lives in San Francisco. And you buy a house in San Francisco, you live with the knowledge that there could be a big earthquake and your house could get leveled.
Right.
I don't think the government in California is sitting there making you sign a disclosure saying you know that there's a potential for an earthquake. I mean, if you buy a house down by the water, you know, it's not the government's responsibility to come in and inform you specifically that, by the way, you know, sea level might rise and it might not. It's your obligation as a buyer to do your due diligence.
And in the case of San Francisco, we have a situation of long-standing, well-known repetitive loss in which the government of California and probably San Francisco have taken robust efforts through coding and whatever to mitigate the risks as much as possible. In the case of sea level rise, we're talking about something that we have not gone through yet. So it is a prospective issue, not a historical fact.
I think there might be a case a little more on point than I'm aware of. Has anyone been to Mattocket on Nantucket? Anyways, I used to go out there every year, and there was a house at the edge of the water. Each year the erosion got further, further, further. Eventually the house was half under, then the next year I went back, it was gone. There was a lawsuit against the town that basically said, hey, look, you granted me a building permit to build this house, therefore you should have known that there was a risk of something like this happening based on the evidence that's out there. I believe they lost at the Superior Court level. It's up on appeal now, so it might be interesting to see what happens there, but at least the original ruling was that the town had no duty, that it was caveat emptor, buyer beware, that's a risk that you take when you purchase the property. So I mean, that's the only, it's not exactly like sea level rise, but I think it's a little bit closer.
One of the things we're trying to do with this plan and this whole planning process is make sure that our coastal residents, property owners, neighbors, and neighborhoods actually do know about what these scenarios are suggesting and work with us to try to come up with plans to avoid the exact kind of situation that Sid says these property owners might be in 20 or 50 years from now. We're trying to work with Seaside Avenue, for example, those properties that have sewage disposal systems that might be compromised 10 years from now, 15 years from now. Let's see if we can come up with some kind of solution to maybe provide sewage disposal possibilities across the street or down the street a ways on some dry land. Maybe you'll share a piece of property with some of your neighbors to do that. That's the whole point of this plan, to try to obviate the need for these sort of catastrophic decisions that come about when the house needs to be condemned because the sewage is flowing out into the street and there doesn't seem to be anything to do about it right away. We're trying to head those kinds of situations off through the planning process that we're hoping to
Just being devil's advocate, I mean, I think you could also make the argument, so these owners that are saying, by the town bringing this up, you've slandered my title to some extent because now you've put people, in their opinion, falsely on notice. Well, that's the thing, you're in a catch-22 as a town. That's why generally it's up. Drugs I can see are a little bit different. Most people don't have the degree of molecular biology or chemistry to be able to make some of those decisions. So you rely on the regulators to do that for you. Buying land has always been a little bit different. I mean, there's been all kinds of history where people bought land and couldn't develop it for what they thought for whatever reason. And the towns have generally not been held liable for that. It's buyer beware. But I just worry, taking the opposite side of the argument, if we do put something in there that says, oh, by the way, in 20, 30 years, it's going to be underwater here, it'd be crazy to buy land here unless there's some plan in place to correct that. Now someone can make the argument, well, wait a minute, who's going to buy my land now thanks to you going out there and publicizing all this? You lowered the value of my property, so I'm going to sue you because I think it's worth this. Now it's only worth this because of the statements you made, so you pay up.
And to that I would add, Kirk Griffin will buy the land because he doesn't believe in it, and that's fine, that's his choice, okay? The important thing is to have him have the benefit of what the town knows so that he can make an informed decision based on what he believes. I can make one based on what I believe and let the market do what the market does, caveat emptor, but with the benefit of the best knowledge available. And that's what people look to you folks as regulators to provide.
adding to that, the challenge that we're facing is not only at the household scale, but it's at larger scale, it's at neighborhood scale, it's at the infrastructure scale of the town. It impacts the tax base for the town. And this question of prioritizing where to work, what adaptations we should do first. So I think the fact that it goes across scales means that it's more than just this issue of individual homeowner decision making.
So removing this appendix would be an adequate fix for you in terms of eliminating the problem of a possible black mark on a property?
I haven't said we should do that or shouldn't. I'm just going with hypotheticals here.
Oh yeah, I mean with the actual plan in front of us. You mentioned before that the acquisition section is about two willing buyers and sellers, and that language is clear to you because obviously as you serve on the Land Acquisition Commission, there's no concern there for you about eminent domain. What can be done to this language to make this plan palatable in terms of eliminating any risk of a black mark on a property for you?
I don't know if you can. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's a black mark on the property. I haven't gotten there yet, and I haven't, sifted through everything I've heard tonight. So at this point, I'm just offering the hypothetical that before we go out and make statements that something's going to happen to this lot, and we put something in the land record so that anybody searching it says, geez, I better be careful buying this. We better be a little cautious because that could be construed by the owners as slandering the title to that and reducing the value of the property, which is sort of like a taking. So
we have Alan Brown here. You own property in that area. What's your view? I mean, you're going to be affected by this. What do you say?
Let me back up just one time. First of all, it's not the town's problem to go out and see somebody's going to buy a piece of property and explaining to them what they should do and what they shouldn't do. There's information down at town hall. They can get down and find out. It's just common information, number one. Number two, the state of Connecticut has a law that if somebody sells a piece of property, they have to tell them any defects that are on that property or they can come back and get their money back. Okay? And that is a real estate agent that told me that they have to establish and tell them any defects that are on that property. Number one. Number two, the problem you had with the septic systems. There's such a thing as an engineered septic system was required all the time. If it doesn't meet that, they can put a tank in the ground and have it drawn all the time. Now you say, that sounds like a little crazy, $1 million house. But you look at Shell Beach and all the areas down there, you look at those $2 million houses, they don't have water. It's brought into them, okay? So people are going to buy it as long as they're told about these things, they're going to buy it. And that's up to the real estate agent or the person themselves to find out.
And that's correct, except that the real estate agent and the owner, as I understand the law, are only obliged to tell about historical known defects, not about prospective risks. What we're talking about here is prospective risks.
Well, that isn't what I was told. I was told for a real estate agent that they have to submit anything that's a defect on that house, and that's why they have them come in and check the houses, and they pay to have them come in and check the houses to make sure there isn't anything wrong in that house. So he says they don't want to have a liability come back on them. Now, that's what I was told. And again, the septic system is a problem everywhere anywhere along the shore. You could stick a big 1,000-gallon tank in there and have them drain it, just like they have to bring water to the $2 million houses down in Shell Beach in that area. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
So you want to tie up because we really don't like to get everyone home.
Okay. Chuck, thanks for being such a good sport and being caught on the side there. You did marvelously. Let me say very briefly, you've got two documents from me. They say the core of what I have to say. I want to make clear, I'm not bashing this plan because I want to see it fail. I've invested as much time as I have in this subject because I most definitely want to see it succeed. But I want it to be what it should be, which is a real plan going forward and not a lot of aspirations. One thing that disturbed me very clearly is that on the board of the list of agencies that should be involved in this going forward, I didn't see the Board of Finance, I didn't see the Finance Department. I call that clueless. Because I don't know how you can deal with a situation of this magnitude and not have your chief financial people and chief financial governance commission deeply involved in understanding the long-term consequences, because failures don't happen instantly. They happen gradually over time. And what we're looking at here is a failure in our environmental structure that's going to have consequences for us. The only way we can mitigate it is with long-term efforts, and first and foremost, we need to understand the economic consequences and capacities that we have to deal with it. If you ain't got the money, it ain't going to happen. And if you don't know anything at this point, and I forget who said it, but I agree with them, you can't depend on the feds and you can't depend on the state. Not because they're disingenuous by any means, but very simply because they haven't got the money. And they're not going to for a very long time. So don't expect another $50 billion to fly out of the helicopter with the next Sandy, or the one after that. Thank you very much, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, I would like to move that the public hearing be closed at this time.
Leave it open to the next meeting, right? Yeah, continue it?
I think that a vote is in order at this point. I think that we've received a lot of information for a long time on this topic, and I think we've spent about 8 years on it at this point.
I'll second it.
All right, I have a second to close the public hearing, I believe.
All right, so...
Well, we could still take information from town.
Yeah, we can still take information.
From town staff.
Well, we had a lot of groundbreaking information come out tonight that some people in town may want to offer their input on. I don't think we're going to vote tonight.
That would be in the form of an amendment, though, at this point. I think that this has gone on for so long. I think that the reality is that minds are made up, more or less. And I think it's appropriate for us to close the public hearing and decide whether or not we want to set up this plan and set a foundation for funding for the public, and set a foundation for starting to protect people who live around coastal resources, or alternatively, if we're more focused on Design 21 or Plan 21 or whatever.
All right.
What's up with that.com.
So, okay, you have your second call vote. All those in favor of closing the public meeting? I got two. All those opposed to closing the public meeting? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, 5. Okay, so
Can you continue the hearing to April 14th?
so can I get a motion to continue the meeting?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, good.
Hold on.
Whatever the Wednesday is.
Yeah, whatever the Wednesday is.
It's the tax day. All right, good. So where's an agenda? We have some business in front of us to take care of.
Approval of bills.
Oh, no. What are the bills this month?
You want to move the minutes to next month?
Yeah,
We have to revise the agenda also.
do we? Okay, so we're revising the agenda again?
Yeah, we're approving the revised agenda because we're not considering the
Okay, so can I get a motion to approve the... Okay.
Second.
Favor? Aye. Okay. What bills do we have? Does anybody know?
Short Publishing, $298. Yeah. 27.
Move to pay.
$300.
Price of democracy.
I move to pay, Mr. Chairman. I move to
This is
pay.
extortion. All right. All those in favor of this extortion?
Aye.
Aye. We are going to put off the minutes, yes?
I just had some minor corrections.
Put off the minutes.
Do you want to, you know what? Richard Wallace has some changes, and then maybe we're going to vote on these minutes.
Okay.
We're going to approve them.
It's only, all regards to 66 High Street. The engineers name is on Nault, N-A-U-L-T, not Knoll, K-N-O-L-L. That appears on page 2, 3.
Well done.
You go.
And the name of the existing, or the reference to the existing property should be the Clinnipad building, not the Quinnipiac building.
The Quinnipiac building? Where is that, in New Haven, North Haven?
That's on page 3.
They have their problems at the Quinnipiac with planning and zoning.
They got their own issues.
3 and 5.
Pages 3 and 5.
All right, so good work. So,
When we were talking about Quinnipiac, and I thought that I must have been wrong.
all right, so good. So,
Close to Clinnipad.
okay, so everyone else has had an opportunity to review these minutes. Are they substantially correct?
Move to approve the minutes with the modifications.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Abstain.
Can I get a motion to close this meeting?
Mr. Chairman, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Aye.